If you are a reptile keeper, I guarantee at some point you'll meet somebody who thinks you shouldn't be having those reptiles. In this video, I want to discuss the topic of reptile keeping. Is it wrong? And what can we do to make reptile keeping better? To begin, this is a subject that has been discussed for as long as people have been keeping reptiles. Often if you tell people you have a reptile collection, you'll get a variety of responses. Some people want to see them, others respect it but have a fear of snakes and would rather stay away, and there are those who are completely and totally against you keeping them. For us reptile keepers, whenever somebody challenges our right to keep reptiles, we tend to get defensive.
No! No!
For myself personally, if I was told I had to give up all my reptiles tomorrow, I would be devastated. I have built up a bond with each animal I keep, and to me, very few things are as satisfying as interacting with my animals. However, I will begin this video off by saying the obvious. I do believe we should be allowed to keep reptiles, but I would like to take a look at some of the points made by those against it. The biggest argument is that it's inhumane. For the most part, people keeping reptiles have the best interest of the animal. We want the animal to have a life better than what they'd have in the wild, and for the most part, I believe the hobby has accomplished this. It's been shown that many reptiles live longer and healthier lives in captivity where it is a controlled environment. However, many will say that wild animals should be kept in the wild. To that point, I completely and totally agree. The importation and trade of wild-caught animals is, in my opinion, a stain on the hobby. While there are certain scenarios where it can be done safely and with little environmental impact, if you're taking a reptile out of the wild, you are impacting the wild population even if you don't intend on it. In my opinion, captive breeding is the best way to go. Now, in order for new species to come into the hobby, of course some animals have to be taken out of the wild. This is an understandable downside to growing the hobby and is pretty controversial in and of itself. However, there is absolutely zero reason for animals such as leopard geckos and ball pythons to ever be taken out of the wild. And there's no reason to be taking threatened reptiles out of the wild just so we can enjoy them in our homes. Excess is something that has plagued the hobby. Reptile keepers such as myself obviously love our reptiles. We love finding new ones, we love finding rare ones, so on. This has led to people doing things they really shouldn't be in order to get reptiles. This is why there are plenty of people out there owning alligators who shouldn't be owning alligators. There are people owning an entire collection of rattlesnakes who shouldn't be owning rattlesnakes. Then, when somebody who doesn't know better sees these kinds of people, well, then they get the idea that this is what reptile keeping is. In reality, if somebody wants something bad enough, they're going to get it. I mentioned just now rattlesnakes. I think I'll hop into another point against reptile keepers, which is the keeping of venomous species. My stance is that only those who know what they're doing should be keeping them. I find it absurd that there is an open market for venomous species, considering that a good portion of people looking into keeping them shouldn't be keeping a corn snake, let alone something like a rattlesnake. Now, this is not the fault of the animal itself, because, as most people might learn, rattlesnakes are similar to other snakes and could actually do quite well in captivity if it wasn't for the fact that they were venomous. There are a good deal of people out there who are qualified to keep venomous animals. People like Kevin at Nerd and Tyler Nolan. These are people who know what they're doing, but even they have been put at risk. Like Tyler, for example, who I just mentioned, who had been bitten before by a cobra and lost part of his finger. The final topic I want to cover is breeding. Breeding is such a touchy subject. I once mentioned my intention to breed reptiles before to a friend and was met with a lot of hostility, which I am actually happy about. See, there are way too many people who breed reptiles, with no plan for the reptiles once they're produced. A great example of this is leopard geckos. Not everybody does their research. Even after I spent years looking into doing this, even before I got my first leopard gecko, I realized that I didn't have a market for them, and I soon gave up on my plans. Not everybody should be a reptile breeder. However, everybody who keeps reptiles probably thinks about it once or twice. Don't get me wrong, it's an enjoyable aspect of the hobby and it is obviously doable, and not incredibly difficult depending on what species. The problem is there's just way too many people doing it, and there's quite a lot of people who are not doing it responsibly. A problem that is rarely discussed is the amount of reptiles that get turned over to reptile rescues. People who have rescues are often flooded by unwanted animals, and a good portion of those are the common ones such as ball pythons and leopard geckos, which are being overbred. There are just way too many reptiles without homes. To add, there is a lot of controversy involving breeding animals with no neurological issues, such as Enigma leopard geckos and spider ball pythons. These animals being bred have also led to many people wanting to outright ban reptile breeding. While I've been wanting to do a whole video on neurological issues in reptiles, I feel like every single reptile YouTuber has done this at some point, and my opinion is pretty much the same as everybody else's. However, if you guys want to have a whole in-depth video on that, leave a comment below and I have no problem making one. If you want to know more about spider ball pythons though, for the time being, look into Clips Reptiles' video on it for an argument for breeding them, and look at Go Herping's video for an argument against breeding them. At the end of the day, I think people who keep reptiles and people against keeping reptiles have the same exact goal. They want what's best for the animal. What it comes down to is education. The main reason I started my YouTube channel is to share what I've learned over the years and try to teach people things about reptiles they wouldn't normally know. I grew up deathly afraid of snakes. I now own 2 snakes. While I still get nervous handling them, I wouldn't have ever been in the same room with them as a child. Now, I handle them and frequently make videos on them. Thanks to educators and reptile keepers, I learned how amazing those animals actually are, and I now have a love for them that I wouldn't have had otherwise. My goal is that people who don't like reptiles will watch this channel and hopefully learn something like I did as a kid. That will hopefully change their mind. Thank you guys for watching, I'm Brendan, and until next time, have a good one.